All right. So, hi everyone. Welcome to this session on global health and the future of multilateralism. My name is Jérôme Duberry. I'm the co-director of Executive Education. I'm also senior lecturer here at the Geneva Graduate Institute. And today we have the pleasure to have a conversation and dialogue with Professor Vinh-Kim Nguyen. So Vinh-Kim is a leading voice in global health diplomacy, whose work has shaped the way we think about health, equity, and global governance. We're going to have a conversation about the concept, the notion of global health diplomacy, but also a discussion about its implications in our current time, the time of transformation, and several transformations that took place in the last years and decades. Professor Nguyen is professor of anthropology and sociology at the Institute. He's also the co-director of our Global Health Center. He recently received an honorary award from the French Red Cross Foundation for his, and I quote, entire research journey devoted to the analysis of humanitarian aid, development, and international public health, as well as its commitment to the rights and access to treatment of people living with HIV/AIDS. Vinh-Kim, thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you.
Maybe let's dive in with the first introductory question. What do we mean when we talk about global health diplomacy?
So I think the meaning is changing, but it has started to change in the last 6 months. But basically, it's the idea that because global health and health issues more generally are transnational in scope, diseases and pathogens move across borders, it requires diplomacy between nation states. So that's kind of obvious. The second less obvious example, and this is what I think is called into question today, is that global health issues are issues where it's possible to sort of set aside, if I can put it caricaturely, set aside geopolitics and conduct diplomacy in the interests of humanity more broadly. So diplomacy is necessary for global health, but global health is important for furthering diplomacy more generally. And that's what how I would define global health diplomacy. And of course, acknowledging the contribution of our founding director, Ilona Kickbush, who many of you will have heard of, and Suri Moon in our thinking around this.
Why did you say that it has changed over the last months?
Well, probably over more than the last months. I mean, since COVID, we've seen that the idea that nations, nations, we won't refer to any specific nations or states, will set aside their geopolitical interests in the name of global health. Since COVID, I think that notion has been severely tested. We've heard about vaccine diplomacy. We've heard about how European and Northern countries hoarded vaccines and personal protective gear during the epidemic. So it's pretty clear, I think it became pretty clear already in 2020 that the idea that there was a realm where diplomacy, the global health realm was one where diplomacy was not about geopolitics or certainly self-interest, has been severely tested and even fragilized. Of course, since January, since the inauguration of President Trump and the announcements about the US pulling out of the WHO, and much more importantly, I would argue, the catastrophic effect of the withdrawal from PEPFAR and the closing down of USAID, I think this idea that there's this sort of morally ring-fenced arena called global health, where we can conduct diplomacy in the interests of humanity rather than nation states, has been indeed tested. And we see now how global health is used very transparently to advance national interests.
Thank you, Vinh-Kim. And yet, I want to reply with the pandemic treaty, right? That was recently adopted. So, there is a kind of a cooperation around health.
So it's called, isn't it called the sandwich, the good news, the bad news, and the good news? So I don't know where we are in the sandwich, but the pandemic treaty is the good news here. From what I understand, we can see in the pandemic treaty a kind of revival of multilateralism, right? A revival of a coalition, a very, very, very broad coalition of states who wanted to demonstrate, the stakes were very high in the pandemic treaty. They were much higher than they would have been a year ago. And so there's in Geneva, certainly there is a strong will to make multilateralism work, to show that it is possible to reach accords in global health. So the question here is, as I said, this view of global health diplomacy, where diplomacy was an arena outside of geopolitics that's been under strain, this is the counter reaction, right, to that. This is people trying to show, yes, we can come to an agreement. I think this is a very exciting time. We live in interesting times because we don't know which way things are going, right? Something old has collapsed. Something new is starting to, I don't even think take shape is the right word, but something is going to replace it, and we don't know what. So we have an early indication with the pandemic treaty that maybe the multilateral system has been damaged, but can still soldier on. But we don't really know where we're going, actually. I think it's very, very early days. Another thing I could mention is that there is some evidence that the American withdrawal has actually been indirectly had some positive effects, because countries are now becoming more how would I put it, are taking charge or taking responsibility for their health systems and asserting their sovereignty in health, which can only be a good thing. It was always, for me, it was always a bit of a weird thing where foreign countries were keeping, chunks of your population alive through aid. That always left you vulnerable to that aid being withdrawn, and in this case, withdrawn in a cruel and unnecessarily punitive way to maximize suffering. So I think countries have now seen how health is also a question of sovereignty, and I think that actually, I would say, is a positive.
So let's continue the sandwich.
So it's lunchtime.
Exactly. I would like to add another element into our conversation, which is the distrust in science, or the contestation, right? With all these, and we saw that with the pandemic, and since then, and with the generalization of AI in many contexts, and generative AI in particular, there is this emergence of a new scale, new scope in disinformation, and the weaponization of information. In this context, is it still possible, especially when we talk about international agreement and global health diplomacy, is it still possible to have a health diplomacy or health policy science-based?
Well, I don't think there's any really real alternative. I mean, I mean, science in this case is about what works. So, we do global health because we want people not to get sick and sick people to get better. And so this is just very, very basic what works and what doesn't kind of stuff. It's worth saying that, and I think this is not obvious to many people, which is that public health deeply is existentially dependent on people's trust for obvious reasons. I think you don't if you don't trust, because public health is interventionistic. It's saying you have to vaccinate your children, you have to eat this. It relies on people adhering to practices that are supported by evidence, practices that work. So you have to vaccinate your children so they don't get measles. If we say instead, you have to have your children eat peanut butter so they don't get measles, and they get measles, then that trust will erode further. So the trust is based, it's a trust that's based on empirical evidence and that people know over time. When I was working with MSF in the Congo during Ebola epidemic, and some of you will recall that there was a lot of mistrust of Ebola interventions of the WHO. And I was sort of working with a group of community workers who were doing education, shall we say. But the thing that I insisted on is that they not talk, that they listen first. And one of the things we learned is that in this community, they trusted MSF because they remembered that MSF 10, 15 years ago had a project, it was a surgery project, and that sick people got better. So that trust is empirical. People trust based on what they see and what they've experienced. Science allows us to know what will work and to make sure that trust is earned. Why the disinformation and misinformation? Well, because it's a very effective and way to undermine that trust. It is not a coincidence that the bots that are amplifying division and mistrust are, associated, or this is science-based. I mean, it's been shown with certain countries that are using them to break down the trust between populations and those that govern them in various countries around the world. Public health is really the most basic, the area where the fundamental element is trust. If you erode trust there, then you've got a big problem. So I think public health and therefore trust, misinformation is a way of weaponizing that trust and turning it into distrust. And what better way than to push, theories about things that don't work?
Where do you see the role of academia and research in this context? Because it's very, very much associated also with science and providing support.
Well, I think there's been as we see in America, there's been a conflation of academia and elites. So academics are members of the elite, and members of the elite are academics, but they're two separate things. And I think that's very important to emphasize. In some disciplines, we have been too ivory tower-ish, in some not so much. Science is fundamental to showing that things work. And I think there's a lot of work to do in academia, that we learn how to better speak to people who are not just ourselves, right? That we go beyond the bubble. And that has been something that, you know, the whole way with the whole academia is structured around disciplines. So academia and, you know, universities, basically they train people to know a lot about very little specialization. And that makes it very difficult to talk to people who aren't specialized in your field. And so there's a really a broader reckoning here about how we produce and reproduce and transmit knowledge. At our institute, you know, we pride ourselves on being multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary, but, you know, we're kind of not really. We still have disciplinary departments, and it's still, and, you know, and we're kind of on the cutting edge. And so if a small institution like ours struggles to be interdisciplinary, you can imagine in a big university how difficult it is. So we've got to learn to talk to each other and to be generalists, and being a generalist allows us to engage with people where they are around the problems that concern them. But this is a huge, and I would argue, existential challenge for academia, as we see in the US. When you're not good at explaining what you do and why it's important, then you can disappear.
My next question will be also very much related to all the work that you're doing at the Global Health Center, which is around this idea of the emergence of new global health ecosystems with different actors, maybe new coalitions. You saw that emerging. What is their potential?
That's an easy one to answer. I don't know. Ilona Kickbush and I just wrote something which will hopefully come out in Geneva Policy Outlook if it's not too controversial. And what we've argued is that, and this is, please understand, I'm being provocative here, but what we're in a period where, you know, the scaffolding of global health has collapsed, right? A lot of the foundations have dissolved. The money isn't there, the trust isn't there, yeah, the money and the trust aren't there. I'll leave it at that. So this is a bit of an extreme, you know, hysterical view, but it's, you know, I think in Geneva, we're going through Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's, you know, 5 stages of grief, you know, negotiation, denial. I'm not citing them in order, but that's my provocative way of proposing what's going on here: collapse and grief. In its place, what we have is a new system that's not a system yet. And it suffers from a 3-body problem. Basically, the 3-body problem, some of you may know the Netflix series or the novel, science fiction, is the idea that when you have 3 celestial bodies, their orbits become unpredictable. It's too chaotic, it becomes chaotic. It's not linear anymore. When you have 2 bodies, you can calculate how they interact in a linear fashion, but 3 leads to chaos. And we have 3 bodies, or 3 gravitational forces that have emerged in this landscape. So one, and these are very broad brush. One is tech, IT, AI, et cetera. The second one is, do we want to call it populism, autocracy, the kind of geopolitical shifts that we're seeing all over the world. And the third one is climate change. These are 3 very big and unknowable things that are interacting in unpredictable ways, and we don't know what will emerge. tech, for example, there's, we all know about, harvesting of data and algorithms, et cetera, this kind of new surveillance or platform economy. Part of that is health data, right? So our medical records are electronic. We have devices. I mean, I don't have one, but which are harvesting our medical data constantly. Maybe they're measuring our heart rates as we scroll through TikTok, right? We don't really know. We don't know where that data goes. We don't know who owns it. We don't know who's doing what with it. And maybe that data can be useful for political reasons to manipulate elections. I mean, I don't know. I'm just making this up. And maybe there are tech billionaires who are trying to construct bunkers and prepare for after the end of civilization because of climate change. Right? I'm being very dystopian here, but I'm trying to give an idea of these three kind of ineluctable forces, strong gravitational pulls that make it very difficult to predict where we're going to go.
Thank you very much. I would also call them critical uncertainties.
Yeah,
as in
sure.
foresight, we call them a little bit like this.
And I'm teaching a course called Global Uncertainties, so around these things. So, but we've talked about this, yeah.
And in this context, with these like shifts and uncertainties, how do we prepare for the next pandemic, or the next the impacts of climate change on health? How do we continue the cooperation and the collaboration? Is there any initiative that you think we should put in place? You're talking about, okay, multilateralism is shaken in its very foundations. What is left? And
well,
I
think what is left is people and people talking to each other. I mean, that's the cornerstone of diplomacy, really. And it's about keeping channels open and communication and signaling clearly. And I think that this is why this is, in some respects, a golden age for global health diplomacy, because all those, as the pandemic treaty showed, from the wreckage, something is still standing and still working. And that's what we have right now to build on. I know that there's a lot of interest, discussion, convening around a new global health architecture, meaning a new architecture for organizations, for how organizations will interact. There's, of course, the legal frameworks, which are part of that architecture, the international health regulations, the and so on, the WHO treaty and other treaties. There's a lot that's there, but it's not clear what this, those basic elements are still left standing, and we can build on them. But how we'll do that is not yet clear. There's, as I mentioned, that focus on architecture, and my own very personal view is that probably we should be focusing more, and this is maybe a very Canadian thing to say, but on process, not about what the architecture should be, but what is the process that should be there to ensure that trust is built and that, that everyone is at the table. But this is, once again, these are early days, but it's a very exciting time actually for global health diplomacy, because this is where it's been needed more than ever, and where for the first time, I think, people are willing to air their disagreements. And, diplomacy is about disagreeing and finding out how to move forward when we disagree.
Indeed, in this context, given that these foundations have changed or are gone, or there is a need to reinvent, there is maybe a lot of now there is space for different actors to indeed share their views because the old is gone. Okay, now let's we can definitely maybe have more space for new voices as well to talk. There is one person who raised their hand, Dawaya Shalali. Would you like to intervene? And then also Tongai Marega. So Tongai, maybe? No? Okay. Feel free to, you can also write it, write your question in the chat and we can definitely answer these questions. Then there is also Dr. Tabo Lucas Seleke. Would you like to intervene? You have to unmute in case you want to share. Okay. Well, in the meantime, I will ask you another question. So it's a bit of a tricky question. You mentioned early on among these critical uncertainties, technology. And I'm thinking here in particular to all the ongoing narratives and also funding and politics behind this movement of transhumanism, human augmentation, and all the also inequalities that this will probably trigger. I was wondering if this is a question that is addressed in the global health diplomacy.
Not that I know of, but I wouldn't be necessarily. I think the conversations that I'm aware of are really focusing. So certainly, overtly, the pandemic, the pathogen and benefit sharing annex of the pandemic treaties. The question of the broader issue of augmentation is generally treated separately from health. It is a wellness issue. It's for the rich who can afford more than just absence of disease. That's what I would argue. Now, the issue does come up around things like I don't think stem cells that I know of have been discussed. Probably, yes, they would come under pathogen and benefit sharing, presumably. So there's some of the technologies behind this augmentation that are where there's questions of intellectual property and so on. But that I know of, no. There hasn't been really a discussion there. I think the global health is about the low hanging fruit. So it's about, as you mentioned, the next pandemic, preparing for the next pandemic, to some extent, concern about, for me, I put them together, but about global aging, the fact that we're all aging, that our population structures are shifting, and so global demography and the fact that as we age we get sick, and so chronic disease, but not wellness, not augmentation that I know of.
Thank you, Vinh-Kim. I can see that Tongai Marega is available maybe to ask a question. So please. You have the floor.
Yes, I think that's a very interesting observation raised by Vinh-Kim. And not so sure basically how to secure that kind of consensus of, acknowledgement and action that is decisive towards even the other future pandemics, i.e., for example, mental health has gone explosively high, driven by the fragility and precarity destroyed by COVID, but let alone the previous cumulative effect of geopolitical tensions and commercialized kind of approach to the human society, which we are functioning, I think, as governors or as governance, to secure human security, peace, and good health and well-being. I don't know, maybe I could gain kind of insight from this panel how we could maybe increase our momentum within the multilateral fora to secure such kind of consensus on implementation and action.
Sorry, implementation and action for what? Because you mentioned several things.
Mm-hmm.
I think mental health, I'd love to respond to that, but I want to hear more from you.
So basically, implementation of the current standing international health regulations, and even the framework of agreement within a multilateral kind of perspective, everyone agrees that there are issues that needs to be dealt with, health and well-being, obviously the role of AI, and and all those kind of create collectively one thing, which is mental health and other health and well-being. But when it comes to the specifics, issue of mental health itself, it still remains, a sidebar in itself that actually is not received with, forceful, I would say, action from implementing the international regulatory environment framework so far secured within the stipulated guidelines.
So I'm going to respond two ways. First thing is I think the question of getting momentum around IHR and other kind of multilateral negotiations in Geneva, this is just a question of diplomatic legwork, I would say, and it's not something that I think the diplomats who are here know more about this than I do. Mental health, I'm going to say something very, so I have a specific interest in mental health, even though I've been working in epidemics. I'm a physician all my life, and I recently retrained as a psychedelic therapist. So I've been working in the mental health space increasingly. So there's something very interesting that we have separated in Western culture, and by extension in biomedicine, and therefore by extension, around the world, we've introduced this separation between mental and physical health. And when you look, speaking as an anthropologist, you see that most traditions in the world, this separation is not done. So I would argue provocatively here that part of the problem is we're being too Western when we think about these things. And many cultures, I think all of them, have actually very robust traditions that I would call wellness, to come back to augmentation. They're about achieving balance and harmony in the mind, in the body, in the community, if I can put it in the more general sense. Whether we're in the Americas or in India or China or Africa, there's a striking commonality there. And our problem when we look through the lens of Western biomedicine is we see the body on one side, like a machine we need to fix, and we see the mind on another side. So I would say, and we've seen this with, you're absolutely right, COVID has been devastating in terms of mental health. It's isolated people, it's, we all know this. But I think the mistake would be, and clearly it's not working, to focus on mental health. First of all, stigmatized. Mental health means dealing with crazy people, or shameful diseases, etc. And I would say let's try and talk about how we live better.
Mm.
And this helps us address also some of the climate change
Issues.
concern
Mm.
issues. Because, you know, as a Westerner, with my mind cleaved from my body, to
Mm.
live better for me is to buy more things and to consume more things.
Mm.
It's to have more. And, you know, most traditions teach us that it's not about consumption. It's about, as I was saying, community. So, you know, that's my very abstract and not very practical answer. But I think there's the practical aspect when it comes to global health is to start to seriously and not in a tokenistic way um, mobilize local resources we have,
Mm.
not putting an acupuncturist in the WHO. I'm talking about, you know,
Mm.
just there's been a lot of, you know, and there's been some very successful examples of this. I'll give you one final example. I'm being too chatty, I know. I get very excited, but in Zimbabwe, there's a program where I read about it in the Financial Times, where for mental health and you know, one of the myths, by the way, is that, oh, you know, Africans, they're so happy, they're not lonely. It's not true. And so this young psychiatrist sort of realized, and he set up a program where they basically took, and I've done similar stuff actually. You go into the community and you find, well, who do people trust? Who do people want to talk to? And they basically had these friendship benches where grandmothers would just sit there and people could come and chat because they were there and they wanted to have a warm, non-judgmental person to talk to, and did miracles for mental health. So the solutions are really the approaches, I think, have to be really rooted in local realities. Another example is when I was working in Guinea, Conakry, Ebola. We wanted to find people in the community who could do education, and we did ethnography. We hung around and sort of asked people, "Who do you trust?" And it was a different person in every community. In some place, it was these Nigerian, mobile bankers, these guys that you give your money to every day, and they bring it back at the end of the month, and they take a percentage, so you don't get robbed. Or in some places, it was a grandmother or a coach. So the answers are very different in different communities, and this was in the same city. So I think we need to really go local. Would be my answer, and that's difficult because the global health space is precisely about not being local. And if we talk about what is emerging, to come back to Jérôme's question, it might be that we're getting more local. We're talking about regional blocks. This is what I was saying about countries. You know, if the Republic of blah blah always had its health system funded 60% external funds, it's of course not going to be able to exert that much control over how those funds are spent, or even over the vision of what healthcare should be. But if that republic is now spending 90%, it is now able to say, no, in this country, this is how we're going to do it. And there are many countries that have done this, of course, but it's been one of the structural challenges of the previous global health, which was there was a lot of money, but there was not an incentive to assert, if you will, sovereignty over who you treated and how you treated and so on and so forth. And I'll stop there.
So sorry, Jérôme, for just jumping in. Let me not be selfish, but just one kind of precise last quick comment on what Dr. Nguyen has just said. And originally myself, yes, coming from Zimbabwe and a mental health practitioner, I think, agree to those kind of sort of comments Dr. Nguyen has identified. I'm not sure whether we are seeing a new future in the global health kind of multilateral focus, mixing or connecting the holistic view with the social determinants of health in itself, from, I think, basically judging what you are saying. that it is about the whole person rather than a dichotomized kind of separated human body. However, here comes the whole question of the geopolitical tensions causing vagaries and, fragility, wars and fights, actually giving all these kind of health anxieties and diseases that we see with destroyed health systems and facilities. Probably maybe consensus could be at the balance of that kind of holistic view, looking from the social determinants and the drivers that are actually driving people mental health and well-being outcomes today. And that is probably going to be 100 years kind of worth of work to bring international actors into agreeing that conflicts are the major driver of the current health and well-being where we are today and people.
Well, you could argue that lack of mental health and well-being is also driving conflict, right? There's something about the yeah, I'll stop there. It's a chicken and egg thing. I'm not going to speak of the.
Thank you, thank you, Jérôme, for the platform.
Thank you very much. We have maybe two other questions from Dawia and then Dr. Thabo Lucas Seleke. Would you like to take the floor?
Audible.
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Nguyen, for the insight and presentation. My name is Dr. Thabo Lucas Seleke. I'm from Botswana. Studied in London at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Just a quick one. You stated something quite fascinating from the positive aspect, especially with regards to Trumpism and its withdrawal from the international space or from the global health space. And then that you stated that the positives is such that it contributes to sovereignty in health. But we do know that there are countries, especially within Africa, in Africa, whose health system has highly been dependent on donor aid and donor finance. So how do you think that the scaling down and the scaffolding of global health architecture can have a predicament in terms of the health system? Follow up to that is with respect to my country, Botswana, which has been renowned to be a middle income country, but we have had serious economic challenges with respect to our diamonds are no longer shining as they used to be, and this it has had detrimental effect to the economy, and then leading on the flip side to health systems challenges, where now we have been in early August, the minister and the president declared a health emergency, and then they established a health fund, which is funded outside the defined global health financing architecture. What advice would you give to our government in that space, or to Minister of Health? Thank you.
So I think there's let's think of it from the point of view of, as many African families do actually, of a budget. What are we to prioritize? What is the most important thing that we need to commit to long term? And to be really undiplomatically straightforward here, we take the example of PEPFAR. We had large amounts of funding that went in to treat specific diseases, HIV, TB, AIDS, global fund, et cetera. And that led to a kind of a distortion, right? Because yes, these are important public health problems, but it led to sort of contortions and distortions as people tried to use this money. And I think there's something about, so a colleague of mine wrote a book on cancer care in Botswana called Improvised Medicine, which is a really moving, and Julie Livingston is her name. And she the kind of suffering, and this book is now at least 15 years old, but there, and I saw this myself, you would go and you would see certain diseases getting treated. I'll try a bit louder. Certain diseases treated and others left on the side. And I think this is a decision that needs to be made locally, depending on local epidemiology and priorities. So I think there would be, and this comes back to the question of trust, right? When you feel that your leaders are listening to you and are making the difficult decisions based on your input, that builds trust and that builds sustainability. And that's a little bit of where I would go, but I'm not a politician. But I have seen how, and the example I gave before about if you show up day after day to do something, you really build trust. And if you do it around something that the community thinks is an issue, then you're really getting 2 for 1 in terms of trust and confidence building. Health is a form of nation building, right? And the post-colonial countries recognized that early in the 60s when they built their health systems. This is how in Europe in the 19th century, nation building was done through social security because there was no effective medicine really at the time. So what I would, I don't want to minimize that the money that's missed, that is being missed now, or is the gaps in funding. I mean, people are dying every day, but there was clearly a better and less cruel way to do this. But I think the imperative is to make sure this doesn't happen again. And I think that the way this doesn't happen again is we don't become dependent on someone else to decide who lives and who dies. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vinh-Kim.
Thank you so much. It does. In fact, I'm happy.
Thank you for your question.
If you're happy, I'm happy.
We have maybe another question from Daoya Chalalai.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Thank you very much. I think I had a little bit of troubles to unmute myself for a little while, but thank you for hosting this very interesting conversation. That took me back actually to my master's degree, what I wrote about the geopolitical conflicts behind the management, so to say, or the cooperation, non-cooperation of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think one of the main factors that struck me and still stayed with me at the time is the access to technologies of many member states that absolutely need, that are absolutely essential for developing protections, vaccines, etc., and the inequality in repartition of these capacities around the world. And the second main theme is the absolute extractivism from the private sector of public funded research on such things as vaccine. And I was wondering if you could comment a little bit more on the pandemic agreement and its final text. Do you think it has addressed these 2 key issues? So the privatization of common public goods, if we can call them that way, that aim to enhance public health, and the second, which is transfer of technology necessary to address a global pandemic?
So I can't answer that in any authoritative way. I have not been involved in the negotiations. Actually, there's I mean, I have a general sense, but I wouldn't feel comfortable answering. It's Professor Suri Moon and Delian Morich and their team who've really been working on that. And I think there are publications you can see on our website. But I agree with your analysis, which is that there has always been historically in this space a tension between, in the early days, the US and the Soviet bloc, and lately pharma and community workers, etc. Community groups, shall we say, NGOs. And this is a fundamental driving tension around basically, public versus private goods and privatization. And this is not going to change. So I don't know. I'm not well versed enough. My personal, what I have witnessed is that private capital, private interests are very well funded, they're very effective, and they're very persuasive. And generally, they tend to be to have generally. They're very present. So clearly, we have to be careful to make sure that any text or anything that happens in this space has not been that it has not been influenced, but that it reflects the broader public good and not just of those who have been taking him to lunch, for lack of a better term. Once again, I'm a physician, so I see this firsthand when you get drug reps trying to, it's the private sector is very sophisticated, and much more sophisticated than, I'll call it, the public sector or the NGO sector or the whatever sector. There's less money and so on. So it's really a struggle to make sure that things are weighted in favor of, or that the rapport de force, that the equilibrium is just. I'll give you an example. I went to a lunch at the World Health Assembly that was about chronic disease in Africa. So, a clear priority. There's a lot of, there's skyrocketing rates of diabetes, obesity, chronic heart disease. There's often this, I won't call it racist, but almost racist conception that it's sort of general conception that, well, over there's only infectious diseases. And that's, of course, not true. There's a lot of chronic diseases, and those treatments are unaffordable. And this lunch was to, draw attention to this fact that there were a lot of chronic diseases that needed treating in Africa. But the lunch was sponsored by a pharmaceuticals firm. And this made me wonder why they were sponsoring this, because they actually make the drugs. So, but of course we want the drugs, right? We're not going to say, oh, pharma is bad, so we're not going to use their drugs to make people better. But it's a question of how, like, in making treatments accessible, we have to make them accessible for all. And the profit motive does not necessarily coincide with the accessibility motive. And this is where the devil is in the details, and why the global health space is so interesting, because there's been all kinds of innovative financing and other models to kind of reconcile, because we need private sector, and private sector is important to innovation. But as you point out, they're also very good at extracting public investments to further private profit. So it's a constant struggle. So that's my answer. But I'm very this tension between access and innovation, availability, profit versus public goods. This is I see this as being the central tension in global health, and it has always been.
Okay, thank you very much. And might I ask a follow-up question, if that's possible?
A short one?
Yeah, of course. We've talked about a little bit the critical uncertainties, but if we cross it with global trends of aging populations in some regions, but also a boom of population in some others, but as well the growing privatization of public goods. What do you see as a perspective for global health diplomacy? And do you think that what WHO through this pandemic truly is enough to get us prepared? I think it joins a previous question about our preparedness to the next pandemic.
Short answer, in the words of a colleague of mine, is that in a way you can never be prepared. Preparedness is you're never prepared. You can't be prepared for what's unpredictable. So will we have another COVID-like epidemic? Will it be something different? We have these three forces. Who would have predicted when the last pandemic came, the impact of Zoom and the ease with which we moved our lives online and the consequences of that. So I think we've learned lessons, but one of the things we learned is that we always forget our lessons. So, and I can cite Ebola. There's, when you look at countries like Uganda and Congo, they've clearly learned and have improved. I mean, I think Uganda is remarkable in its ability to, the last Ebola epidemic they had. So there's clearly learning that happens practically when you've been through it. But at the same time, every time is different. So, and we see how, history keeps repeating itself. So I think we'll be better prepared, but that will reveal new zones of unpreparedness where we'll have unexpected consequences. So there will always be unknown unknowns. That's where I'll stop my answer. Not very satisfactory.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your question. Thank you, Vinh-Kim, for this very interesting and insightful discussion. If you want to know more about global health diplomacy, Vinh-Kim is giving sessions in our executive education program. We have 2 days dedicated to global health diplomacy in the program Diplomacy, Negotiation and Policy, which is starting, but you can still register. We will share with you the recording of the video, and we thank you very much for your active participation. My name is Jérôme Duberry, and I'm very happy to wish you a very good day. Thank you, Vinh-Kim, for your participation.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your sandwiches.